Back a little over a decade ago in the mid-2000s, the NBA identified that they had an issue, a real issue. You had so many kids coming straight out of high school declaring for the NBA draft. It wasn't good. Now, we could sit there and say, who are we to prevent these kids from potentially pursuing their dream and having a shot to make money? I understand that and I get it. But in so many of these cases, you could just see where this was a disaster waiting to happen, that this was a very bad decision. They were getting very bad advice. And ultimately, a lot of these kids weren't getting drafted. Then they have to go overseas. And you want to talk about not being ready physically, mentally, emotionally to play in the NBA at 18, 17 years of age. Imagine being a kid fresh out of high school. And now you're traveling to another country away from your friends and your family, your former teammates, coaches, all of that. Just epic disaster. That's exactly what it is. And having so many of these big time stars, even the kids that could make it straight out of high school, having them sit there and declare right away was viewed to be bad for the college game, which it most certainly was, because college basketball, didn't get the star power that it once did. And then these kids were coming to the NBA and they were nowhere near ready. Rare is it where you get the high school kid like a LeBron James who could come in and average 19, 20 points per game as an 18-year-old. LeBron James was once in a generation type special. Like even going back 15 years, 16 years before LeBron came into the league, you look at Kobe, his rookie year, I think he averaged like 6 points a game. Now maybe he could have averaged a little bit more if he would have been given more of an opportunity, but as special and talented as Kobe Bryant was as a wing player, a once in a generation type of kid, it still took until year two for him to really find his feet and his rhythm at the NBA level. And these are two of the greatest players of all time, mind you, that I'm talking about with LeBron and with Kobe. So if there was adjustment there for them, especially in the case of Kobe, and certainly for LeBron as well, who was just a man amongst boys and still is to this day, imagine how many of these other guys who didn't have those abilities, that didn't have that physical build, didn't have those traits and characteristics, how bad they were going to struggle. So the NBA instituted this one and done rule saying you have to be at least 1 year removed from your high school graduating class before you can declare for the NBA draft. The thought being was that this was going to be a multiple benefit system where colleges would at least be able to get these kids for 1 year, and maybe hopefully once you get them in for 1 year, you can have them for 2 or potentially even 3 or 4. But at least if nothing else, you get them for 1 year. So all these big name stars from high school would at least have a year playing college football, potentially playing in the March Madness tournament, building up their star power, elevating the profile of the program that they played for, which is going to be good for college basketball and would be good for the NBA because these kids are coming in with some larger name and game recognition than they would have playing strictly out of high school because they're going to be on national television more. So it's a little bit easier to try and cultivate their star power and work with it. Then you're also thinking about these guys played at a higher level of college for 1 year instead of sitting on an NBA bench, not getting any tick, wasting away. And as a result, that's got to be a positive because they're going to come to the NBA a little bit more ready. And in principle, it works, you would think. And in theory, it makes a ton of sense. But the problem is one and done for the NBA is really a half-assed solution to a much bigger problem. And eventually, you get a diminishing return from that policy, and you ultimately get a standpoint where we are now, I believe, where it just really didn't make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. It just didn't. Because now you look at it, it's been bad for college basketball and it's been bad for the NBA because so many of these kids are one and done. They only play 1 year of college basketball, so they really aren't that much more advanced from where they were as a senior in high school. Now they're coming to the NBA as only 19-year-olds. Still, in a lot of cases, not physically, mentally, emotionally mature enough, and their game's not advanced enough to where they can really compete at an NBA level with any consistency. It could take 2, 3, 4 years for these kids to become the type of players that they can be, similar to when they were just coming straight out of high school. College basketball suffers because so many of these programs try to go after these one and done kids, and you're in this constant state of tumult and turnover where every year you have to replace these guys. Every year you have to basically retool and rebuild your team. And the college basketball product of recent years has really sucked. Let's be honest. It absolutely has been terrible. And then when you look at the NBA and the impacts to the NBA, You get these rookie classes where in a lot of cases it still takes 2 or 3 years for these kids to really step in and become the type of NBA players that they should be because they're just not ready on so many different levels for in terms of their game, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, all that stuff. They're just not ready. And how many people actually legitimately would be ready at 18, 19 years of age to play in the NBA against the best players in the world? So the NBA gets these guys, and teams sit there in the lottery and they pick these guys high, but they still have to wait 2, 3, 4 years for them to start to really show what type of player they could be. So now you get into a cycle where, in an era of super teams like the Warriors and the Cavaliers, it becomes even more challenging to usurp these teams and knock them off of their pedestal because these teams have established players. They've built their foundation, they've built their core. For so many of these teams that are picking in the lottery, it, in theory, can take you years if you're in a really bad place to get out of that hole because you're waiting for all these 18, 19-year-olds to develop in the type of players they're supposed to be. So whereas you used to have it where a team could get a real impact player, like let's say a Shaquille O'Neal in Orlando going back to the 92 draft, his rookie year, they're on the borderline of the playoffs, and 2 years later, they're playing in the NBA Finals. You don't see that now. Like you look at that 2015 draft, Karl Anthony Towns going #1 overall. He's a stud. He's going to be close really soon to being a top 5 player in the league. And the T-Wolves are still terrible. And you could talk about a variety of factors and this and that. But this is still a kid who made a big step in year 1 to year 2 and so on. But when you take these kids high and how long it takes them to cultivate their game and develop and grow and improve as players, it just takes a really long time to get yourself out of that hole. So what you get stuck with is where the NBA is now in kind of this disaster space where only 2 teams are really championship contenders. Only 2 teams really matter. As a consequence, the league presents the product in a way where only 2 teams really matter. So fans, as a result, don't really care about most of the rest of the product, nor should they, because you're taught everything about the league is about the Warriors and the Cavs, and that is not a good thing. And then when you look at the product of the NBA as a whole, because these kids that did come after only 1 year of college, when they start getting tick, they're just a long ways away from being real, true NBA star talent. And the product suffers as a result, and it's not good. So it was good to hear Adam Silver talking about the one and done rule a little bit and talking about rethinking it and revisiting it because it needs to happen. It has to happen. Because the NBA continues to go down this path, their product is going to continue to suffer and it's only going to get worse. It has no way that it's going to get better. When you look at the NFL as an example of how to do it better, they require kids through their collective bargaining agreement to be at least 3 years removed from their high school graduating class before they can declare for the NFL draft. They can't usurp the process. We're trying to sign with the team. They can't do this. They can't do that. You got to wait at least 3 years, which means worst case scenario, you're a redshirt sophomore, or you're a junior with 3 years of actual playing experience at the college level. You just look at it, the positives of this. Players come in at 21, 22, 23 years of age when they're coming out of college football because maybe they've stayed 3 years, but they were only a redshirt sophomore. They feel like I can stay 1 more year. Well, by that point in time, they will be redshirt juniors after their 4th year of college. And what do you know? They're ready to go to the league even with a year of eligibility remaining, and they've got a college degree behind them. You've got kids that are coming into the league 21, 22, 23 years of age. They're coming in as men. They're more physically, mentally, and emotionally matured, at least you would hope so. You've also got these players that have spent years at a higher level compared to high school, years of incorporating some NFL principles into what they do at the college level. It just works so much better. You look at the NFL, they've got a 7-round draft where you can have 253 picks. You get a roster size of 53. Additional practice squad spots, I think it's like 10 of them. So you got practice squads where some of these guys, even if they did declare and they weren't quite ready, you could take them late in your draft after several rounds and potentially hide them on your practice squad and wait a year or 2. The way the NFL does it, I love, in the sense of you got to take at least 3 years removed from your high school graduating class, which means you become very familiar with these players. These guys come in with a lot of attention, with a lot of name recognition and notoriety, and a lot of star power behind them. Again, makes it much, much easier for the NFL to market these young kids from day number one. Day number one. And these kids come in much more ready to play at a professional level than what the kids do playing college basketball in the NCAA. Now, of course, the downside to this is the way it's collectively bargained. It forces kids to basically play for scholarship and stipend money, and that's about it, for 3 years at least. So the NCAA profits off of these kids, and unfortunately, these kids aren't in the profit sharing program. There's also the potential for career ruining, career threatening injury. There's so many things that could potentially be at play. So I'm not saying it's the be all end all solution. It just works so much better. Whereas the NBA, you only have to be a year removed from your high school graduating class. Again, 18, 19, maybe 20-year-old kids, as opposed to the NFL where it's 21, 22, 23 years old. You get guys to the NFL every year come in as rookies, and they can make splashes, and they could become stars. Whereas in the NBA, you can have entire draft classes that rookie year, and none of them average even 10 points a game. It happens quite a bit because so many of these kids just aren't ready for prime time yet. But the NBA only has a 2-round draft where you can only make 60 selections. Now, granted, as opposed to a roster size of 53 for the NFL, you only have 15 in the NBA. But again, when you just look at the entirety of it, the way the NFL is structured works for the NFL, and it works so well. And to me, it works so much better than what it does for the NBA. Like when you look at the NFL draft is one of the most popular events that the league does every year. It's a monster in and of itself. And they've turned the scouting combine into a freaking monster. Whereas the NBA, I don't even think most people realize there is an NBA combine. And most certainly when it comes to the NBA draft, there just isn't that excitement level there. Because really, honestly, you could have your opinions, but who the hell knows with so many of these kids? And that's a frustrating place to be if you're an NBA general manager or scout. You're trying to determine what these kids have done based off of, 35 maybe games of college basketball and trying to determine if you could build a franchise around them. Holy shit. Now, I mean, granted, with the one and done rule, you could say at least the kids don't waste time in a place they don't want to be. A lot of these kids just want to go to the NBA. They don't want to waste time in college. So you're not forcing them to be there any longer. It's a chance for kids to potentially pursue their money, get their money earlier. And if they do make it, it gives them the ability to have more long-term earning power because they're starting their clock for their first free agency period and that first mega potentially max contract at age 19 as opposed to the NFL rule where it has to be 21, 22, 23 years of age. So it gives you more earning power as an NBA player to come into the league at 19 years of age. But it overall, it so negatively impacted the product and negatively impacted a lot of these organizations. The NBA has to do something. And here's my thoughts on what the NBA should do. It's not a perfect answer. There are parts of it that I'm not in love with, but trying to compromise and trying to come up with a better solution, here's kind of what I think. They have to eliminate this one and done rule. At this point in time, you would be better served saying, if you want to come out, don't waste a year of college because you're killing the college product too, and you're not helping the NBA product. It has killed the college and the NBA game, this one and done rule. It was done with the right thought process in mind. It should have at least been, when it was instituted, a 2-year period of time. Sometimes in collective bargaining, you compromise and you have to get what you can get, and the league got 1 year. And it's not good enough. You have to eliminate the one and done too, because frankly, in some cases, you have to look out for these kids. And you could say, well, is it really in their best interest to play in the NCAA for another year? No, but who's to say they have to play in the NCAA? They can go sign with some international TO overseas. Nobody's saying they can't do that. They could still go make some money that way. They just don't need to be in the NBA yet. And in a lot of cases, what you're doing by eliminating a one and done rule is you're protecting kids from themselves and the bad advice that they get and the bad decisions that they make. In my opinion, the NBA should be instituting more of a Major League Baseball type of draft system where, in theory, you can come straight out of high school. You can put your hat into the ring as a high school prospect. You absolutely can. But there's a period of time where you have to withdraw by, and if you don't withdraw by then A, you're stuck. B, you either have to go to school or go play internationally if you're not drafted. It's that simple, unless somebody wants to sign you as an undrafted free agent. But if you don't come straight out of high school, then you have to wait at least 3 years. If it's good enough for the NFL, where again you're talking about guys have much shorter shelf lives and make much less money, even the big stars, compared to NBA average players. I mean, the shelf life of an NBA career is much, much longer than the NFL because of the physical wear and tear of the NFL game and what have you. What would be so wrong besides the NCAA component of it with these kids having to wait 3 years? Because long term, I think it's more beneficial for them. Although you could argue at this point in time, the fact in the NBA with the cap exploding due to the new television deal, what the hell difference does it make? Because guys like Alan Crabb and Evan Turner can get 17, 18 million a year. So basically all you have to do is be good enough to last long enough in the NBA to get to your first period of free agency, and you're going to get paid. You know what? That's true. But if you take this and you say you have the option to come out straight out of high school, or if you do go into college, you have to stay at least 3 years. Imagine 5, 10, 15 years down the road after that rule is instituted, how superior the college basketball product would be compared to what it is right now. And then thinking about it long term down the road as well as a consequence, how these kids would be coming into the league as 21, 22-year-old men. Imagine how much more physically, mentally, emotionally prepared they are to play at the NBA level, so you can get back to the point where guys can be drafted as rookies and they can come in and average 18, 19, 20 points a game and be impact players from day number one. You occasionally have drafts like that still where this can happen. You look back at 2003, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade in particular. You could throw Chris Bosh in there if you want. This was a time where you still had kids could come straight out of high school. You look at Bosh and Anthony, they only stayed in college 1 year. James came straight out of high school. Wade stayed 3 years. But all these guys came in and were ready to wreck house almost immediately. That was a special draft class, though. Those were special players. Those are Hall of Famers. You don't get those guys every year. But imagine if you could sit there and get these kids to stay at college for 3 years, how much they could work on their game, improve their game, and just imagine how much better the college product would be to watch and how much better ultimately the NBA product would be. And this rule would apply to international players too. You got to be at least 3 years removed from high school graduating age, which means you probably have to age cap them at being 21 years of age in order to declare. It's only fair. As you can't sit there and say, well, we're getting rid of the one and done rule, but international players can declare for the draft at 18 and being drafted. No, it's bullshit. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it fair across the board. I think the NBA should expand the draft to 3 rounds covering 2 nights, which helps from a marketing standpoint, because eventually now you've got kids that have been in college for 3, 4 years coming into the draft. There's more name recognition. There's face recognition. You've got more star power in your draft. People are naturally more excited. It places more importance on the NBA draft. It also allows you additional picks to select players that can improve your team, additional draft pick currency to potentially improve your team. You see a couple of guys every year that go through the draft process, get undrafted, and they end up being at least viable role players at the NBA level. You look at Isaiah Thomas for the Boston Celtics, a guy who was an MVP candidate this past season, led the Celtics to the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. This was a kid that was the very last pick in his draft class. If somebody else would have been drafted, he would have been undrafted. So who knows what other guys could be sitting out there in the 3rd round if you actually had a 3rd round. It just, to me, it would also allow you to place a greater emphasis on the NBA G League, as it's called now. It used to be the D League. You would have every team have its own affiliate, which we're close to, but that's where position we really need to get to. You could also use a portion of the luxury tax money to help fund the league, to make it more viable, to give it more solid financial footing. It would be a place to draft and stash kids and develop them underneath the auspices of your organization for potentially up to 3 to 4 years where you have team control on them, somewhat similar to the minor league baseball farm system. Now, I'm not talking about having rookie ball and short season and low A and high A and double A and triple A. Frankly, sometimes I wonder if baseball really needs that many levels of the minor leagues, but that's what they've got, and it works for them. I'd like to see it where there's a greater emphasis placed on these D leagues, because let's say you do decide to take this kid who didn't want to go to college, took him straight out of high school, but you know he's 2 or 3 years away from really being able to play at the NBA level, but his upside is massive. Why not let him go get some tick at the NBA G League level? Why have him sit and rot on your damn bench? You can call him up when you need him. You can send him back down when you need him with no consequence whatsoever. To me, it would also be beneficial because it helps keep more of these kids stateside and keeps them underneath the umbrella of their organizations. To me, when you look at it, I don't know how realistic this is in terms of getting to a point where we can have players have to stay 3 years. That's why I offer the compromise of if they want to declare straight out of high school, they can, but if they don't, then they got to sit there. And you could say, well, that could be disastrous too, because a lot of kids are just going to skip college entirely. Well, at this point in time, if they're going to skip it entirely, then maybe that's a good thing. Because going there for 1 year hasn't been helpful to the college basketball product, and it really, frankly, hasn't been all that helpful to them. But even if in that case, you could draft these kids and you could stash them and you could have them play in the G League and you can keep them there a year or two and let them get running, let them get ticked, let them get some NBA level coaching, and then you can bring them up to the big show when you're ready for them. You're not just having them sit on the bench and rotting for 2, 3, 4 years, basically the entire length of their rookie deal. The whole point of all this is the current NBA system, while an attempt to fix a previous bad thing, hasn't been any better. It's just been an extension of the problem of the past. And it is important for the NBA to fix this. Because surely, while you'll have some people in the basketball media try to sell you that the NBA is in a great place and what's going on with the Warriors and the Cavs being the only two viable teams is a good thing, I assure you it's not. When your audience believes that 99% of your games don't matter until the 7 at the end of the year, because those are the only two teams to take seriously, they're only two teams that have a chance to win a championship, and you lack parity that badly, that's not a good place. Because what that leads to is wide swaths of fan bases throughout your league that don't care. They're indifferent because if their team has no chance to be a championship contender, then why would you bother? And you've gotten to the point now where a lot of people with the NBA are saying, why would we bother? I'll just tune in June and watch the NBA Finals. One of the big ways the NBA could help fix this from a long-term standpoint to improve the overall growth and stability and quality of the NBA and college basketball as well is scrapping the one and done, getting to a point where it's either 2 or 3 years that you have to stay in college if you don't declare straight out of high school. And I promise you, it would force the league to do some other things that could be a good thing to do. Overall, anything other than what they're doing right now and what they have been doing for years would be a win-win situation. This is just my thoughts on how the NBA can change the one and done rule and make it better for everybody involved.